What the political version of Plan Dalet and the military directives had in common was the overall purpose of the scheme. In other words, even before the direct orders had reached the field, the troops already knew exactly what was expected of them. That venerable and courageous Israeli campaigner for civil rights, Sulamit Aloni, who was a woman officer in those days, recalled how special political officers would come down and actively incite the troops by demonizing the Palestinians and invoking the Holocaust as the point of reference for the operations ahead, quite often the day after the indoctrinating event had taken place. After the consultancy had approved Plan Dalet, the acting chief of staff, Yigael Yadin, summoned all the intelligence officers of the Haganah to a building that housed the headquarters of the Jewish Public Health Service, Kupat Cholim, in Tel Aviv's Zamenhof Street, still functioning as such opposite a popular Indian restaurant. Hundreds of officers filed filled what was normally a reception hall for patients. Yadin did not tell them about Plan Dalet. The orders had gone out that week to their brigade commanders, but he provided them with a general idea that was meant to leave no doubt in their minds as to the troops' ability to carry out the plan. Intelligence officers were also politruk, political commissars of a kind, and Yadin realized he needed to account for the gap between the public declarations the leadership was making of an imminent second Holocaust and the reality that the Jewish forces clearly faced no real challenge in the scheduled depopulation of the territory they wished to turn into their Jewish state. Yadin, dramatic as ever, set out to impress upon his listeners that since they were going to be issued with orders to occupy, conquer, and dispossess a population, they deserved an explanation of how they could afford to do so when, as they read in their newspapers and heard from their politicians, they themselves were facing the danger of annihilation. The officer, whose tall and lean figure would soon become familiar to all Israelis, then proudly told his audience, "Today we have all the arms we need. They are already aboard ships, and the British are leaving, and then we bring in the weapons, and the whole situation at the fronts will change." In other words, when we find Yigael Yadin's narrative depicting the last weeks of March 1948 as the toughest period of the war as a whole, we might instead conclude that the Jewish community in Palestine was not in any danger of annihilation. It was facing some obstacles on the way to completing its ethnic cleansing plan. These difficulties were the relative lack of arms and the isolated Jewish colonies within the designated Arab state. Especially vulnerable seemed to be the few settlements inside the West Bank and those on the northwestern parts of the Negev, Negba, Yad Mordechai, Nizanim, and Gat. These four would still be left isolated even during the Egyptian forces' entry into Palestine that overtook them for a short while. Similarly, some settlements in the Upper Galilee were not easily reached or defended, as they were surrounded by scores of Palestinian villages that were lucky enough to have the protection of several hundreds of volunteers from the ALA. Finally, the road to Jerusalem was subjected to Palestinian sniper attacks, serious enough for a sense of siege to descend over the Jewish parts of the city that month. Official Israeli historiography describes the next month, April 1948, as a turning point. According to this version, an isolated, unthreatened Jewish community in Palestine was moving from defense to offense after its near defeat. The reality of the situation could not have been more different. The overall military, political, and economic balance between the two communities was such that not only were the majority of Jews in no danger at all, but in addition, between the beginning of December 1947 and the end of March 1948, their army had been able to complete the first stage of the cleansing of Palestine, even before the master plan had been put into effect. If there were a turning point in April, it was the shift from sporadic attacks and counterattacks on the Palestinian civilian population towards the systematic mega operation of ethnic cleansing that now followed.